There are a few dozen leading centers around the world where if you're a baby and there's any suspicion that you have a genetic disorder, you'll get a rapid genome, you'll get an instant answer. But that's not the standard of care. Now is the time to turn the corner and make this the standard of care.
When a child is seriously ill, the search for answers can feel like a marathon, sometimes with no clear finish line in sight. But with advances in genomic medicine, the path toward diagnosis and treatment is becoming clearer, faster, and for some, filled with new hope. Welcome to Tomorrow's Cure from Mayo Clinic, a podcast that brings the future of medicine to the present. I'm Cathy Wurzer. It's so nice to have you with us. There are some dramatic changes happening in pediatric care thanks to whole genome sequencing, advanced treatments, and of course, AI. And joining us for an inside look at these changes, three great guests. Dr. Whitney Thompson is with us from Mayo Clinic. Dr. Thompson's clinical and research interests lie at the intersection of genomics, ethics, and neonatal intensive care. Dr. Stephen Kingsmore is also with us. He's the CEO and president of Rady Children's Institute for Genomic Medicine in San Diego, where they are using whole genome sequencing to help critically ill newborns. Sean George is also here. He's the CEO of Inflection Medicine, which focuses on genomics-enabled precision medicine. What a pleasure to have all of you with us. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.
Thank you, Cathy. Appreciate it.
Our pleasure.
Dr. Kingsmore, I'm going to start with you. I was doing some reading before our conversation, and as you know, there are about 300 million people living with a rare disease, which when you hear that number, rare diseases don't seem that unusual. But the figure that struck me specifically was that half of those people are kids, and it takes years for a diagnosis. So I'm curious, give us a sense of what is often called a diagnostic odyssey. What's that like for families?
Well, it's horrible, Cathy, and it's completely needless. So the math there is there's tens of thousands of these diseases. Overwhelmingly, they're genetic. Overwhelmingly, they start in early childhood. But there are adults listening to this podcast who have one of these diseases and they've never been diagnosed. And so the diagnostic odyssey is because, in general, the medical profession is really bad at detecting these diseases. And so patients go their lives misdiagnosed as having a common condition when actually they have a rare genetic disease that's masquerading as a common condition. And for a very few, 5% maybe, they actually will get a precise diagnosis, and it's life-changing. Suddenly they have a label. They understand what's wrong with them. They understand why they've not been responding to therapies. And it's just the gate opening to a whole new way of getting what we call precision medicine.
How's the landscape changed then, say in the past 10 years or so, for diagnosing rare conditions? I'm assuming it's changed dramatically, Dr. Thompson.
Absolutely. So I started here at Mayo just a little over 5 years ago, and that's when I met Stephen Kingsmore. And, here in the NICU, we would go through stepwise genetic testing for patients. And so they would get one test, we wouldn't get an answer. They would get another test, we wouldn't get an answer. Sometimes they would go home without ever getting an answer and then go on to have that long diagnostic odyssey. Whereas now, and really 5 years ago, we started this in our NICU, we send what we call rapid whole genome sequencing, one comprehensive rapid test that can look at, all of the genes that we know currently to cause disease and hopefully find an answer for families.
Is that rapidly becoming standard of care in most NICUs?
I would say not in most NICUs, but in a lot of NICUs. In our NICU here at Mayo, it absolutely has become standard of care. 5 years ago, we started a pilot in collaboration with Rady Children's Institute for Genomic Medicine. And since then, it was very clear that this is helpful for our patients and has become very much the standard of care. And so now when a baby comes to our level 4 NICU, we ask the question, could this patient potentially have genetic disease? Which is very much a paradigm shift from how we did it before. And we have a set of broad criteria. And if a patient meets that criteria, they're offered rapid genome sequencing.
Mayo Clinic's out in front, right? Now, that's fortunate if you're in the network of Mayo Clinic, but for the rest of the world, it's not good news. There are a few dozen leading centers around the world where what Whitney said is true. If you're a baby and there's any suspicion that you have a genetic disorder, you'll get a rapid genome, you'll get an instant answer. But that's not the standard of care. And most people are still trapped in that diagnostic odyssey. It's our mission, the three of us, to change that. We believe that now's the time to turn the corner and make this the standard of care. There's no reason not to, other than just a momentum shift.
Sean George, why is this so important to you and your firm?
Well, it's important to me personally. I've pursued genomics my entire career from the very beginning when the Human Genome Project was announced. It just captured my imagination at the time that indeed we would be able to understand the genetic blueprint for life for every individual and improve healthcare outcomes and costs as a result. I'll say it's been a frustrating career. Things that, I've been active on the technology tools, diagnostic services side. I've been actively trying, for no lack of effort or funding, pushing forward to a day when the frustration expressed by Dr. Kingsmore, there's no reason at all why any of these kids would be bouncing around the medical system for decades trying to figure out what's wrong. And what I'm really excited about what Inflection is doing is you can see that, these cutting edge dozen or so hospitals where children that have a genetic disease are getting diagnosed, and then bleeding edge institutes like Mayo Clinic that are now pushing forward genetic therapies, N-of-1 therapies, bespoke medicines. That day is here, but the vast majority of children born are still born in an environment where that information, while easier to get than it used to be, isn't acquired. That information then isn't put in play either in labor and delivery or in the NICU or in the pediatric wellness checks. That information is not being used by the average everyday practitioners. Inflection Medicine is solving that problem by building a platform that acquires all that information rapidly, inexpensively, integrates it with the medical record and the record of treatment in the hospital, and then delivers to the clinicians and the care teams that maybe they don't have a team of experts and geneticists next door working on all of this. Maybe however they want to provide the leading edge care given a genetic diagnosis. That's the platform we're building. That's what we're pursuing here at Inflection Medicine to kind of push this along, so then we can get to the real game of what are the variety of new technologies we can put in play for these kids to improve these kids' lives.
Maybe this is a simplistic question, so I apologize, Dr. Kingsmore, for it. But I'm wondering, as we talk about sequencing to find the cause of some rare diseases, what have we learned about genetic disorders through sequencing? Are they much simpler than previously thought, more complex? How has it changed?
Oh, the world has changed dramatically. I mean, it used to be a book we couldn't read. It was written in a code we couldn't understand. And now we do understand it. We can read it. It's a novel. We can read it in every person. We can point exactly to why they are sick and what we need to do to fix that. It's a revolution. What we discovered is that the diseases are much, much more diverse than we thought. Take something like autism or infant death, sudden infant death. These are two projects I'm working on right now. The common perception is that sudden infant death or autism is a disease, it's a thing. They're not. They are an agglomeration of hundreds of genetic diseases that have a common set of symptoms or outcomes. And if you don't know which of those you have, you're giving a kind of generic treatment. It's kind of like you're going to McDonald's and they only have one thing on the menu. And hey, I'm vegetarian. Sorry, you're getting a burger, right? We need to change this.
Echoing those comments, I think, one thing, as the codex has been unraveled over the past many years, the answer is more complex than ever. And I would, however, say that there's a lot more of it than there used to be. People used to assume the genetic load, the disease burden due to genetics was quite low percentage of the incidence in the population. It's becoming increasingly understood that genetics drives an awful lot of etiology, certainly anything going wrong with children, and then even later in adult life. So, it's certainly gotten more complex. There's a lot more information, but it's also gotten a lot more impactful in terms of its ability to kind of really, really impact healthcare. Phil Riley, I remember a conversation with him just even a few years ago. He was an early pediatric geneticist. And, I asked him, like, what would he think, kind of in back when he kind of first started practicing, late 70s and early 80s, with the tools that are available. His comment was so quick, right off his tongue, it would seem like magic. And I think that's the thing that, like, some people forget is technological advances in the last 2 decades of genomics if you go back 20 years, it would seem like magic how quickly and effectively and inexpensively we can get 3 gigabases of information, all of which is starting to be decoded. Again, I think what drives certainly the three of us and our colleagues in various aspects of the space is that let's let's take advantage of this magic and try to do some good with it, not just continue to study it.
Yeah, I wondered too, Dr. Thompson, how has artificial intelligence, as you layer that over what is already existing when it comes to genomic testing, how is that changing the game?
As both Sean and Stephen said, we learn more about the genome as we are able to read the code. There's still so much we don't know, not only in the diagnosis, so identifying a specific genetic variant and how that corresponds to the patient's phenotype, but then what do we do with that information? And so, one of the very exciting things we're doing here at Mayo is using AI after we get that initial diagnostic genome result. And so we get that answer on the genome, and then we use an AI program called NIH Translator, and that helps us find potential drug repurposing hits. So drugs that are already available, already have safety data for other conditions that we can then potentially tap into to target a patient-specific genetic condition. And that's something we're working on here in our initiative called BabyFORce.
Tell people about this because I'm thinking about a story that I know you had deep ties with. Baby Jorie is her name, and that was quite a story how you helped her out.
So I met Jorie in the first couple weeks of my NICU fellowship here at Mayo a few years ago. And like many patients who come into our level 4 NICU, she was born with multiple congenital anomalies and had some various challenges, which we had no unifying reason for. She was a great candidate for our genome sequencing program. And so we sent that rapid genome sequencing. Within her first week of life, we had a diagnosis. She had a condition or has a condition called DeSanto-Shinawi syndrome, missing part of her chromosome 10 and a gene called WAC or WAC. And like many of the patients who are getting these ultra rare diagnoses in our NICU, I went to the family and said, yes, it's wonderful. We have an answer. We know what's going on. But unfortunately, we have nothing to treat this condition with. And that's the case for so many rare genetic conditions. And so inspired by Jorie and other patients in our NICU, we launched an initiative called BabyFORce, and FORCE stands for Functional Omics Resource. And Jorie became our second patient as part of that program. And what we do is, as I mentioned, we use that AI tool, NIH Translator. We input Jorie's specific genetic variant. So in her case, she's haploinsufficient or missing one copy of the gene WAC. We found some potential drugs that are already available on the market that might be able to upregulate that gene. From there, as part of our BabyFORce pipeline, we got a skin biopsy from Jorie and actually tested these drugs in her own cells in the lab and proved that one of these specific drugs could actually upregulate her WAC gene to wild type or normal levels. And from there, we were actually able to then bring that treatment back to Jorie, and we've seen just incredible effects from that.
Really? How's she doing?
Just within the first month of starting that treatment, she started walking, she started talking, and these were things that, she had really struggled with up until that point. And she's been making developmental gains, far beyond what we would have expected from her initial trajectory. So it's been just incredible to see.
That's quite a story. Dr. Kingsmore, do you have a success story, something similar to that using genomic testing and then AI?
We've also been using a lot of AI. The genome is a book 400 feet tall, right? So for a human to read it, it's going to take them a year. Obviously, with AI, we can read that within a minute and achieve a diagnosis. And then, as Whitney said, the quest is on for a therapy, hopefully for a cure. And for most patients, that's not the case today. There are relatively few cures. We are entering a new era of genome medicines, but it's still early. There's still only 20 or 30 approved genome medicines. And so what people like Whitney and others are doing is what's called N of 1, which is where you focus heavily on a single baby and you develop a treatment specifically for them. This can be done in a year. This is amazing. The FDA can give approval within 3 months. And so you can go from concept or diagnosis to actually first dose administration in 1 year. So our equivalent of baby Jorie is a little boy called Connor. He's now a teenager. He went through the diagnostic Odyssey. And when he came to us, he already was a teenager. He was wheelchair bound. He had autism. And his underpinning condition was a genetic epilepsy, but it presented in him at that age primarily as devastating autism. We were able to build through a partnership. This always requires partnerships across institutions and across organizations. But in partnership with several other organizations, we were able to build a specific piece of RNA, highly related to DNA, that sits down on the bad copy of his gene and switches it off selectively. So the normal copy, the gene's called SCN2A, the normal copy gets to express itself and the bad copy doesn't. Well, the first time we gave it to him, he stopped seizing, started to peel away his anti-seizure medicines. And then, just like what Whitney described, he started to rewrite the textbooks. When you have developmental loss, that's supposed to be irreversible. Well, these little kids, they're defying that. He also started to walk. And the medicine that he gets, he needs to get injected into his spinal cord every 3 months. And so it wears off. At the end of his dose, he again becomes wheelchair bound. But during the time when that medicine is active and we're still titrating the dosing, we're seeing these gains. He's seizure free. An awful lot of his behavioral symptoms associated with autism are no longer troublesome. And when you talk to him, we didn't realize he could communicate, right? He was nonverbal. When I say we, I mean his physicians, not me directly. Discovered he could communicate through a touchpad. And he said, my brain used to be on fire, and now my brain feels comfortable. Can you believe it? We didn't even know he could communicate.
Wow. Oh my goodness, what a story. When you mentioned his treatment, is this a type of gene editing technique in a sense?
Yeah, there's now maybe 10 different, we call them platforms. They're different ways to bring the therapeutic side of DNA into the equation. It's something that Mayo's a leader in. It's something that we're trying to keep up with them on. And here in San Diego, we're very fortunate. We've got lots of biotechnology companies, and some of them are masterful in what we call RNA therapies. They're not gene editing, but they are corrective. As I said, it's switching off the diseased copy of his gene and allowing the other copy still to function freely.
This sounds incredible, but it also sounds incredibly expensive. Is that one of the big challenges, perhaps?
The other thing that you can do is avoid an immense amount of cost in the procedures and the testing and the diagnostic throughout a diagnostic odyssey. Certainly in the acute setting, the work that was led by Dr. Kingsmore and then spread into a variety of different groups, independent peer reviewed, have demonstrated, anywhere from $10,000 to $100,000 per bed savings by using genomic information instead of all of the other stuff that was being done to try to figure out what was going on. And then when you talk about it's not a large, but it's a non-insignificant percentage of the pediatric population that for years bounces around from specialist to specialist to specialist. The cost avoidance by simply reading the book and understanding what to do is immense. Now, with that said, you're right. These bespoke N-of-1 therapies, they are expensive. However, if you really look, close at the inputs with scale and automation and little investment, you can kind of see this in the world of genomics as the technologies have advanced over the last 20, 25 years. You can easily see the cost of treating one of these individual kids coming down 2 orders, 3 orders of magnitude. That's going to be within reach for anybody that needs it. There's a sidebar here, which depends on what healthcare system you're in. Fun note, clinical genomic sequencing, there is more of it being done outside of the US than in the US right now. There's a lot of reasons for that. None of them are particularly good. But if you think about where the cost could go and the incentive structures aligned correctly, this is going to be available to anybody who needs it. Not immediately. This is going to take a good many years to develop, but it's not as if these miracle stories, these amazing stories are out of reach. With some investment, some diligent work, some good old-fashioned ingenuity, these will be in reach for the individuals that have it.
These technologies, Dr. Kingsmore and maybe Dr. Thompson, you can jump in here too. These technologies, I'm wondering, could they be adapted perhaps and used over and over again to fix mutations in other places in a person's DNA?
I think a lot of us are focused very, very hard on exactly that idea. How can we have a success with a baby Jorie or a baby Connor and then scale that so we say we can offer this for a diseased community? I mean, right now it's going to be the centers of excellence who are in the therapeutic piece. I totally agree with Sean. Every NICU needs to have genome sequencing and be using it every single day. But for this specialized therapy development and then getting that to disease communities, that will happen organization by organization. But yes, we're thinking very hard about how do you go from N of one to N of many. Because think about it, so much of the risk in terms of development of a new therapeutic, you've solved for all of that, right? So you've taken 99% of the risk out of the equation. It's now a matter of how do I make this applicable to the majority of patients? But a lot of that has to do with the fact that most of those kids are still on their diagnostic odyssey. And so even though we might have a brand new medicine that could be effective in their case, we can't find them and they can't find us.
I would absolutely echo a lot of what Sean and Stephen just said, that, this technology should be in every NICU everywhere. I've seen firsthand just how powerful this technology can be. You mentioned, the cost of all of this, and absolutely, but I've seen just how much cost savings there are when we implement this technology early within the first week of life for a baby in our NICU. And not only the cost savings, but the savings of, so many different painful procedures and that long diagnostic odyssey that we've been talking about. And then from there, we can't even think about a therapy until we have the diagnosis. And so absolutely the diagnostics need to be everywhere. Now we have that technology, and a lot of the work that Sean and Inflection Medicine are doing is to make it accessible everywhere.
What's the experience, Dr. Kingsmore, of Project Baby Bear, the state of California that makes the rapid whole genome sequencing available? It's funded by the state of California, right? Can other states look at that as a potential model?
Yeah, so the story with Project Baby Bear was that for a while, the technological problem had been solved. A genome was very doable and it wasn't too costly, and nowhere had really adopted it. There was no policy in any state in the US that said, yeah, this should be used in these kids. And so the state of California coughed up $2 million to do an implementation project. So, not research, implementation. Was this technology ready to be deployed? And specifically in Medicaid babies. And so in 5 states in California, reflective of the entire state, and some of those places are very agricultural and some are very urban, we tested 184 babies as part of Project Baby Bear. We returned results in 3 days. We solved 40% of the cases, and we saved $2 million in hospitalization costs. So we took that back to the legislature, and they issued a policy which said that for such babies, rapid diagnostic genome sequencing is now Medicaid policy for California. Well, then we had Project Baby Deer in Michigan. And from that, we've had Project Baby Everything. Everybody was thinking about what's their state animal and named a project after it. Now we have 20 states with Medicaid policies. So we're starting to see this trend where we're going from this being something that was used as a last resort in only a few babies in a few leading NICUs to now starting to become something with universal coverage.
Sean, I'm kind of curious then, how do you think this could be a better democratized, and maybe get this technology into the hands of so many other people across the world? What has to happen?
First is the work that Dr. Kingsmore just mentioned. So those kind of studies are absolutely necessary. Everyone agrees you've got to show in the real world with real cases that deploying the technology works and is cost effective. That groundswell has begun, and it's happening state by state, 22 states or so. I will point out, however, if you're a citizen of California, while your state paid for the study and deemed it not only actionable but cost effective, there actually isn't payment for that in the state of California. 20 or so states do pay for it, and undoubtedly that will pick up. I mentioned outside the US, again, any ministries of health around the globe, NHS in England, they're well ahead of this idea. They're beginning to put newborn screening, newborn sequencing policy in place. They're working on implementation. This is coming to a country near you, and that will democratize the information and get it in the hands of people who need it. There's a bit of an issue and a massive complexity, and then making sure the right information is delivered to the right people and made actionable. That's the problem Inflection Medicine, the company I run, we're trying to solve. And it's largely an information play with the genomic technologies advancing, and especially AI. It's just a perfect problem for artificial intelligence to solve, and putting all those tools together, we feel will then democratize it even more.
Dr. Thompson, do you want to make a comment about this?
Yeah, I mean, getting our rapid genome sequencing program launched here at Mayo, I mentioned I reached out to Dr. Kingsmore 5 years ago now, and we started a pilot program together here. That was very successful. We were able to scale up across Mayo, and we've been so fortunate that, I'm at an institution that is able to do that and to scale up this kind of technology and offer it to all of our patients. But I know that's not the case everywhere. I've seen this technology is very important for our patients. It's really a tool now that I can't imagine not having as a frontline clinician in the NICU. And so I want that for clinicians and patients everywhere.
I'll add, Cathy, I think this is kind of the thinking, we're a conceptual goal at Inflection Medicine is there will be a day, and I think certainly everybody in this podcast and certainly all of the colleagues that we have worked with and trained with, we all know this at some point it's going to happen, but there will be a day where we will look back and think to ourselves, how did we possibly practice medicine without understanding? The blueprint was right there in front of us and we weren't using it. That day will come. I think our collective goal is to make that sooner than later.
Do you agree, Dr. Kingsmore?
Oh, totally, totally. I mean, I've been on this quest personally since 2005, and we looked at the first medical genome in 2008. It was a middle-aged Korean guy, and he had a pretty boring genome. And frankly, back in 2008, when we looked at a genome, we weren't really sure what we were doing or what to do with it. We found out that he had a gene for hard earwax. That was the sum finding, you know? But, he was a middle-aged adult and he was healthy. And so maybe it wasn't so surprising that we didn't have any great insight. But it wasn't until 2012 that we did our first rapid genome. And that was 4 babies and 3 of them got a diagnosis. And we all looked at one another and said, what just happened? And then we found people like Whitney and said, hey, what do you think you could do with this? And wow.
BabyFORce is a very interesting program that you've got there, Dr. Thompson. So what's the hope? What's the goal, the next stages?
2 different things. We talked a little bit about Jorie's story specifically and how that's really an N of 1 success. And we want to take that from N of 1 to, N of however many patients there are with DeSanto-Shinawi syndrome. We know of at least 100. And so we're working towards how do we scale up from this N of 1 therapy to a clinical trial for patients with this condition. And so we're in the process of figuring that out right now. And we really want to set the precedent with that so that with our next BabyFORce success, we can quickly scale up from N of 1 to touch all of the patients with the condition. And so that's one thing we're working on. Alongside that, we are working on how can we scale this? We want this to be available to all of our patients here at Mayo and then all patients broadly who have a genetic diagnosis. And so thinking through each step of that process right now, there is a lot of human power that goes into that. And there are a lot of bottlenecks. And so we're thinking about how we can bring AI into various components of that. We're working directly with the NIH translator team on how we can make some of those steps a little bit faster so that we're not having to bring the human power to do all of those steps. And then at the same time, in the lab, my lab partners are working to automate various steps of that as well. So we're really thinking about scaling. And one of the things I'm most excited for is, if there's a way to potentially partner with the work that Inflection is doing so we can really couple the diagnostics that will hopefully be brought to patients everywhere with the individualized therapeutics so we can really make the greatest impact.
What one development do you 3, whether scientific or regulatory or cultural, do you think makes you most optimistic, say, for the next, 5 or 10 years?
I think it's really the work, putting everything together. So we all need to work together on this. And I don't think there's any one thing, honestly. I think it's to really go from pre-test to post-test and make this a package that any NICU or really any inpatient medical practice or eventually outpatient can implement without needing, a whole workforce to do it. I think that's what's going to take this technology to the next level and make it available to patients everywhere. And then to go from, certainly AI is going to be a big part of this, what we're already doing with BabyFORce. And the hope is that, we can not only bring these diagnostics, but hopefully therapeutics as well to patients everywhere.
Yeah, I would just say the same as Whitney. We have been like on an icebreaker ship, right? Trying to forge a way through heavy pack ice at like 0.1 miles per hour. But what we're leaving behind us is open ocean that thousands of vessels can transport through And that's what we're waiting for. That's what we're trying to do, is to open up sea lanes so that all babies can benefit from this. And it won't end with babies either. You still have your genome for the rest of your life, and there's fresh insights to be had at every stage in life. And so it just so happens that babies come first in this race. That's the most important time to get it, is the moment the baby's head crowns. There are other places where we're going to see similar transformative advances in outcomes. It's going to be so exciting.
I talk to young people all the time with an interest in genomics and an interest in medicine and improving the human condition. I find it optimistic. Let's keep that optimism going would be my message. You mentioned the regulatory. I think that it is slightly trending positive. The various regulatory agencies involved, the leaders of them are starting to understand, and I think legislators are as well, that overregulating the flow of information in healthcare, probably isn't a great idea. And you loosen that up just a little bit. Don't regulate information like a medical device or a drug that you're putting in people. And that's helping. And I do see that trend. I think that realization is happening now that these data sets are getting so large and updated so quickly. I think that's also a reason to be optimistic. And then on the cultural and societal, right now, my view of this, the biggest ethics violation that we are collectively all performing right now is not using this information when it's available. These kids' lives could be dramatically improved, and we're not using it to the full extent. I think the reason for optimism is you can see that this is changing rapidly now. People are starting to get it.
Sean opened the door, and I think it's an interesting point, Dr. Kingsmore, that he's talking about. There is a definite line to dance, is there not, when it comes to the ethics of some of the testing and therapeutics?
Yes, we have to be very, very aware that, as in all of healthcare delivery, we have to be very respectful of the rights of human beings, to realize we're dealing with a human being who's a sovereign individual and who has the rights to make their own decision, the rights to make decisions for their children, and also the right to privacy and confidentiality. And we need to also protect their rights against those who might try to impinge upon them, whether they're insurance companies or any kind of predatory behavior. And we have to be guardians of that. That's nothing new for medicine. Medicine has always been tied to human rights and protection of human rights and protection of disadvantaged people, whether they're sick or they're elderly or they're newborns. And that's not gone away any. It's become more complicated because we live in a digital, immersive universe that is something we could not even have dreamt about. And so some of the ethical concerns are different than what they traditionally were, but it's the same stuff about select groups of people being disadvantaged who really oughtn't to be. They ought to have the same rights and the same access and the same future and hope and expectation. And it really behoves us to do that. And yet the world has also changed in that medicine used to be really paternalistic, trust your doctor, he, she knows best. And we're now in a different era where we realize that the patient-doctor relationship is two individuals having a conversation rather than what it used to be, and that's a different dynamic as well. So it's complex, and it's definitely a big part of the agenda for anything that's new or pioneering in healthcare.
I have a final question for all three of you. I like to know what makes people tick, right? You've all been in this field for such a long time. What spurs you on? What ignites you to keep going, to see where this all ends up, to see your goals realized for this technology?
For me, it's that there is just so much hope at this point for what we can do with this technology. And so I've been in this field now for 5 years, and looking back where we were 5 years ago to now, it's incredible the progress we've made. And I can't even begin to imagine where we're going to be 5 years from now, 10 years from now, 50 years from now. And I'm just excited to see where it's going to go throughout the course of my career. And stories like baby Jorie, and I can tell you many other stories similar. That's definitely what keeps me going and makes me very excited to push on in this field.
The impact that you can have for these people's lives. I mean, mine, having it be real personal, I now have a almost 16 and 18-year-old. There are some diseases that run in our family, our extended family in the older generations. it's heartbreaking to think of, my kids facing those, and they're genetic, so think of the impact of those on my kids when their time comes. And the tools and technologies, you're starting to see the toolkit develop that actually that doesn't necessarily need to be the case. That's incredibly motivating. These parents don't have to spend years bouncing around trying to get answers, all the while they're trying to figure out what to do with their life. It doesn't have to be that way. It's my personal burning goal to end that era.
Thank you. I appreciate hearing that. Dr. Kingsmore?
Well, my motivation has changed with time. A couple of years ago, I had a grandniece born called Heidi. She was born in Northern Ireland, and she was admitted to the NICU, and she had respiratory problems, and she was a little bit dysmorphic, and she was discharged home. And my sister, who had been a NICU nurse for much of her life, recognized there was more going on. She went into the diagnostic Odyssey mode. This was in Northern Ireland. They had never done a rapid genome ever. So after a period of time, her mom and dad got used to the fact that maybe a genome might be beneficial. And then we went through this nutty thing where we had to get a geneticist in Ireland to agree to send a blood sample to San Diego, which they did. And 2 days later, we had a diagnosis. And unfortunately, it's a disease called Milan syndrome. It's a difficult disease, and there's no effective therapy for it today. And the closest condition to Milan syndrome, it's a growth disorder, is Smith-Kingsmore syndrome, which was named after me and my collaborator, Laurie Smith. And what are the chances? My grandniece has a 1 in a million disorder. This is phenomenally rare, that's related to the disorder that's named after me. And so, we now have a new mission, and it's both to get Northern Ireland to do their second rapid diagnostic genome and then their 2000th, but also it's to say, how do we really do this thing that Mayo's pioneering to get therapies for kids for whom we don't have them today? We've got time. These diseases, some of them are fairly slowly evolving. And so we've got a couple of years. How do we turn our genomic knowledge into practical solutions? They might not be cures, but how do we give them the best life they can?
Dr. Whitney Thompson from Mayo Clinic, Dr. Stephen Kingsmore from the Rady Children's Institute for Genomic Medicine, and Sean George from Inflection Medicine. Our true pleasure. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Cathy.
Thank you, Cathy. Very much appreciate it.
Tomorrow's Cure is a production of Mayo Clinic with production help from the Podglomerate. Be sure to follow Tomorrow's Cure wherever you get your podcasts. I'm Cathy Wurzer. Thank you so much for listening.